Hey everyone, it's Rob B here with Rob D, and you are listening to the Property Podcast. And this week we are talking about exit strategies, the end game. How do you finish up in property? What is the most efficient way of doing it? How will tax impact you? We've got that all covered with some basic strategies, but also some really advanced stuff as well.
Welcome to the Property Podcast. In case you don't know, we run a business that buys more than £150 million worth of property every year for our clients. You can find out about that at propertyhub.net/invest. And although we're still building, we're still growing, a lot of people are thinking, okay, this is all well and good, but what am I building towards? What am I going to do at the end? What am I going to do with all these mortgages? Well, today we're going to run you through all your options and we're going to talk about which ones we plan to choose. So stick around.
We're bringing a bit of international flavour to our news story of the week, and I can guess why. Rob, maybe you can explain in a moment. But this week's news story is about the Spanish property market, and it's in the FT. Rob, what's inspired you to bring this story to us?
Well, this caught my eye because I'm in Spain right now. I'm recording from Barcelona, which is lovely, but not so lovely if you are a property owner, because according to this story in the FT, which we'll link to in the show notes, there's a major problem with squatting and illegal occupation, not just in Barcelona, but also Madrid, Malaga, and many other big cities. And this is because there's a property shortage in Spain, as there is in the UK, but there are also very weak enforcement powers. So if you do have someone who's living in your property illegally, if they've broken in or something else, you can't get them out, you can't turn the utilities off. There's really not a great deal you can do. And surprise, surprise, when you make it easy to do something illegal and there are no consequences for it, people tend to do more of it. But Rob, what I thought was really interesting is that I was on Idealista, which is the Spanish equivalent of Rightmove. Of course, I'm sure you do this. I hope you do this. When you're on holiday somewhere, you get interested about local property prices and you go on and you take a little look. So that's what I was doing. I noticed that it's like Rightmove. You've got all the filters. You can filter by price, by type of home, by number of bedrooms and all that kind of thing. But there is a special filter for illegally occupied. So you can specifically exclude or include properties that are illegally occupied. It's like, man, by the time you've got a filter on Rightmove for this, you know you've got problems.
Wow, that's wild. And yes, Rob, you'll be pleased to hear that, mentally at least, I've purchased property all around the world. So I've visited different places. It's a very fun game to play. I can't help myself. I just want to know what things cost in certain areas. And not just internationally, in the UK as well. If I visit a nice area, I'm like, oh, this would be a lovely place to own another property. But all in my head, of course. So that does make our UK system sound a bit better, but you can absolutely play our system. And in time, I don't know how long it's going to take because it's still got stuff to sort and it's been going on a long time. I'll bring to you an episode on the podcast which is going to leave a lot of you disturbed, shaken by how bad the system can be. And unfortunately for me, that's based on personal experience. So I will bring that to all our podcast listeners in the near future. But yes, it's not as bad as Spain, I'm pleased to say, but you can really manipulate the UK system as well if you know what you're doing. So that is an episode in waiting. Now, we've been podcasting for a very long time, and we've recorded a lot of episodes over the many years we've been doing a podcast, but only a very small number of them have related to finishing up in property. Yet so many of you ask us, well, how does this all play out? How does it end? What is the end game for property? Well, in this episode, we've got you covered. We're not just going to give you one path, but there's multiple different options, which is great. It's nice to have those options. And there's no pressure. You don't have to pick today, but it's good to have in mind how it could look, because that might make a difference to what decisions you make today when you've got an idea of how you're going to exit in the future. So, Rob, you can be our Carol Vorderman. You can start with the numbers. I know you love numbers. Let's take people through a overall scenario of how their portfolio could look in the future. And for some people, it'll be more than this and some people it'll be less. But the nice, simple numbers we can work with, which then allows us to get into the options.
Yeah, so let's just say that you're hitting retirement age, whatever that means for you. You're hitting that now, and you've got a £3 million portfolio, which has £1 million worth of debt. And because this is a portfolio that you've built up over time, lucky you, the asset value, the value of that portfolio has roughly doubled since you bought it, which means, of course, that the leverage has roughly halved. So you've only got about a 33% loan to value now, but it was, of course, double that when you bought. The £3 million portfolio with £1 million worth of debt. And just for simplicity, let's imagine, to keep it neat, that's made up of 10 properties and each is worth £300,000. Okay, so what's that portfolio doing for you today before we get into what you can do with it? Well, let's say that pre-tax is generating £210,000 in rental income. I think that's underdoing it for various reasons, but let's not worry about that because, as we'll see, the amount of rental income doesn't affect any of the calculations. So let's just say £210,000 worth of rental income. Off that, you'll take £50,000 worth of mortgage costs. So that's assuming that you're paying 5% interest. We'll take off £42,000 for other costs. That's 20% of the rent. And that leaves you with £118,000 in profit. Now, numbers on a podcast are tricky, so we'll pop these in the show notes so you can go and look at them as we go along in case that makes things easier for you. But if you're driving right now or something like that, then don't look at the show notes. Just remember that you've got 10 properties, £300,000 each, £1 million worth of debt. And at the moment, through rental income, that's making you a pre-tax profit of £118,000. So like you said, Rob, some people will be way beyond that. For some people, that might sound really distant, but it doesn't need to, because over time, you can absolutely get there.
So let's look at the options. So we've got some really interesting, spicy options to bring you shortly, and some advanced options as well. But option one is probably the most obvious one. It's just keep the properties. You're getting £118,000 of profit from that portfolio. For a lot of people, that'll be more than enough. That's a good number. And remember, that number will increase over time. Rents tend to match inflation over the long term. So at some points, rents will outperform inflation, like it is right now. And sometimes rents will underperform against inflation. But you know, over the long term, because of the data that we have, that rents match inflation. So you've sort of got an index-linked income forever. And in percentage terms, the mortgages keep drifting down. Because that £1 million worth of debt is fixed because it's interest only, as your portfolio grows in value, the loan-to-value rate keeps reducing. So your loan-to-value keeps reducing. You've got income that will match inflation over the long term. Now, something that may have come to mind for you is, well, what do you do about the mortgages as you retire? Because as you may expect, as you get older, your mortgage options will reduce. Not be eliminated. You'll be surprised how flexible the market is, but you will have less options. But if you want to open those options up again, if you're buying within a company, a limited company, you could restructure that company to bring in children for longer term mortgages if that's something you need to do. But remember, you still have options for mortgages well into your 80s. So it's not a necessity. It's just another option that you have. So that's option one, Rob. Probably the most obvious, the simplest to do. But we have many other options.
We do. So let's go from there to the polar opposite. Let's say that you've got to this position, property's done well for you, but it's not for you anymore. You just don't want the hassle. As you're going off into retirement, you want to almost literally sail off into the sunset. You want to be on deck, on your cruise, sunning yourself and not worrying about getting any phone calls from your letting agent. You just want a shot of them all. So what would that look like if you sold all your properties at that point? Well, because they're worth 3 million and there's 1 million of debt, then of course, if you sold them all, then you'd end up with £2 million. That 2 million will not be yours though. You're going to have to pay capital gains tax. So if we assume that the gain you've made on that portfolio is 1.6 million, and we assume that capital gains tax at whatever point you're doing this is the same as it is today, then that would be tax of £384,000. Round it up a bit to take account of selling costs, and you'll end up with £1.6 million cash in the bank. So you did have a portfolio of 10 properties, bringing you in £118,000. You've now got £1.6 million in the bank instead. So what are you going to do then? Well, you're going to go and invest it in something else. And let's just assume that, again, because no hassle is your goal here, the whole point of this was to make life easier, you're just going to invest in something super ultra safe. Something that returns, say, 3% a year. That would be an annual income of £50,000. So you've taken a big pay cut, your income is more than halved, but all your debt is gone, all your worry and your hassle is gone. Depending on your lifestyle, you could just live off that income. But also, of course, you can gradually run down the capital if you want to as well. So those are the two extreme options, Rob. But there is something in the middle as well.
There is, and there's some advanced stuff to come. But before we get to that, the third option is paying off the debt. So, in this scenario, you would sell 4 properties. And remember, they're all equal value, so it's nice and easy. So that brings in 1.2 million. But we will have capital gains tax. So that would be £153,000. So you wipe out that £1 million worth of debt. So now, in this scenario, your portfolio is worth 1.8 million. You have an income of 126,000. Like before, we've put some general costs in there, so £25,000 for things like maintenance, which is actually quite conservative based on the size of your portfolio now. But that would leave you still with £101,000 worth of profit before tax. So you've gone down from 118 to 101, but you've got an easier life because you've got less properties in your portfolio. You've only got 6 to manage now instead of the 10, so still a reasonable number, but less to deal with. Less mortgage applications to deal with as well, which for me seems to be one of the biggest bugbears, all that paperwork. So that's a nice, simple option. It simplifies the portfolio, it simplifies the admin. Yes, it reduces your profit by a bit, but life's a bit easier. Maybe you're prepared to take that income sacrifice just to simplify things. And that's why paying off the debt will appeal to a lot of people. And a lot of people I speak to plan to do this exact strategy. So a blend of the two, I think, will be appealing for a lot of people.
So those are your 3 basic options. You keep everything, you sell everything, or you sell just enough to keep going debt-free. But there are some more advanced options and things that you can be thinking about as well. The first of those options I would call optimizing. So you might be happy with the overall size of your portfolio, might be happy with the income it's bringing in, might even be happy keeping the debt, but you think that your portfolio could be optimized because the portfolio that you use to get you there isn't necessarily the portfolio that you want to keep on holding for the next 20 years or more, hopefully, of your retirement. So you might keep the portfolio value as it is, but change some of the properties. Use it as an opportunity to move into properties that you believe are going to be easier to maintain. You could use it as an opportunity to switch to properties that are geared more towards income. Now that's perhaps more important to you, whereas previously growth was your main motivator. You could even take on micro optimizations and rebalance equity between properties. You could end up with some that have a higher loan to value and others that you hold outright. Maybe that's with a view to gifting in the future. So that's your first advanced option, which is basically a spin-off of keep them all. It's keep the portfolio size, but change the constituents. And Rob, there's another advanced option as well, which is one that you've been speaking about for many years, ever since we started this podcast, in fact. And all the options we've covered so far are probably pretty obvious. You could come up with them off the top of your head. This next one definitely falls under more advanced because, hey, it's what the billionaires do.
It is. So why not act like a billionaire and use this strategy? Long-time listeners may remember this strategy. It's called the ultimate property strategy. What you would do here, like Rob said, this is what the rich do, is live off the debt. So, you've got that portfolio worth £3 million, and you've got the £1 million worth of debt already. What you could do is refinance out 2.5% worth of that portfolio each year, so that would be £75,000, with the expectation that your property will grow more in value than that amount, because over the long term, it absolutely has, and you could quite reasonably expect over the long term for it to grow by at least 5% a year. So you've always got more equity building in your taking out. But the beautiful thing about doing it this way is that £75,000 is tax-free. Why is it tax-free? Well, because it's a debt. You're living off a debt, and that debt is being serviced by rent. Your rental income will also be going up as well, and you'll still have a rental income surplus on top of that money as well. It actually starts to look too good to be true in many aspects when you start working through all the numbers. So this strategy is very effective. Admittedly, a little hard to get your head around at the beginning, but this, arguably, while one of the more complex strategies, is one of the most effective strategies. So a quick reminder, you've got that £3 million portfolio, you've got £1 million worth of debt. You take 2.5% out, which is £75,000. When I say take out, that's equity, that's a remortgage. You live off that money with the expectation that your portfolio is growing by at least 5% a year. So that's going to be £150,000 increase. And your rent will pay for that new debt you've taken out. Now, where people may be listening to this going, oh, this doesn't work because of that reason or this reason, the biggest complaint with this one is, well, you've got to do a remortgage every year. And that's fair, but there are things like drawdown facilities. So you could get a drawdown mortgage against this portfolio potentially. Of course, the mortgage market's always moving, where you could have access to, say, up to £1 million worth of debt, but you only pay for the debt that you use. This is more common on residential property, admittedly, but there are new products coming to the market all the time. If you did that, you've got the access to the million of debt, but you only pay for what you use, then that £75,000 is a lot easier. It's like just drawing down from a bank. Now, speak to a mortgage advisor if you are in this position, if you are near the end game of your portfolio and this appeals to you. Maybe go back, listen to what I've said again, just so it really sinks in, and then speak to your mortgage broker to see what options you have available to you. Draw 150,000 down, use 75 a year, tax-free again, remember that's the big win here, and just do it every couple of years. This is advanced stuff, but it's worth getting your head around because it's very attractive to property investors, and certainly from a tax perspective as well. And remember, while £75,000 sounds less than some of the other scenarios we've talked about, that's the equivalent, under our current tax regime, of earning around £114,000. So the gross income equivalent is 114, which is very similar to the numbers we've talked about. So 75k after tax, or tax-free, is very, very attractive.
The nice one about that one is it's the logical conclusion of something that property is so geared towards in the first place, and something we talk about all the time, which is using debt as a tool. So you use debt as a tool to grow your wealth while you're accumulating, but then you're using debt as a tool for income without tax, which is really nice. And of course, this only works if you've got loan to value headroom in your portfolio. But you can look at this as delayed gratification. So you resist refinancing as you go along to grow your portfolio faster. You let the loan to value drift down, which means you can then draw on it for income later on. I suppose one downside, though, if you're thinking about passing assets on, is that you're effectively shrinking the value of your assets because you're increasing the debt against the equity. And the final advanced option is the flip of that, really. So if you're comfortable, you've got other investments, and you're in a very settled place, then maybe inheritance tax becomes a problem. I would always argue that inheritance tax is someone else's problem because it's never going to be yours by definition. But nevertheless, a lot of people get older and think, hang on a minute, when I die, my kids are going to get a whacking great tax bill, and I'm not happy about that because I've already paid so much tax on all of this. So another advanced option is to start the process of passing the portfolio on early, because the earlier you do it, the more options you have to mitigate that inheritance tax. So if you have properties that you own individually rather than in a company, then you can start gifting those properties early. And that could be a reason, as I mentioned earlier, for reallocating any mortgages you still have. So you've got some that you own outright. If you get those out of your ownership early enough, then that transfer could end up being tax-free. If you own the properties in a company, then there are different ways of achieving the same thing. You can start restructuring the company, you can start gifting shares. There's all manner of things you can do. If passing assets on is a big part of your driving reason to invest in property in the first place, then company ownership can be very attractive because it gives you more flexibility. You can, to some degree, split out the income from the growth. And of course, you can pass on more flexibly because you're not having to do things in like property-sized lumps. You can settle individual shares. And if that is something that you think you're going to want to do in the future, then it's well worth talking to your tax advisor about that early, maybe even at the point that you're setting up the company, because you can set up the share classes and so forth to give you the flexibility that you think you're going to want in the end.
So the great news is you've got options. It's not just one option as well. And it's also worth noting that it's not one option suits everybody. It will depend on what you want in the future, what's important to you, will dictate the exit strategy you pick. So what would we do? Rob, going through these options, as it stands today, and the great thing is you can absolutely change your mind, but as it stands today, what option would you pick? What would you do?
I think if I had to choose one of the basic three, then the way I feel now is I'd just keep going. I'd go for option one. I'd keep them all. I don't think I'd feel the need to sell them. I'd have got that far. I've got systems in place for managing them, so all good. I can see the attraction in paying off the debt, but after a lifetime of using debt as a tool, clearly it's not something I'd be fazed by or losing sleep over, so I just want to keep that power. So I think I would default towards option one, but start giving some thought towards restructuring to gradually pass on. And I think knowing what to do about that is the hardest part for me at the moment, because my kids are very young. I don't know what they're going to turn out to be like. I don't know how involved they're going to want to be. I don't know, frankly, how generous I'm going to want to be to them. I feel like I've been pretty generous with what I'm giving them now in terms of their upbringing. Don't know if I'm going to want them to inherit that much more. So that's probably the unknown. But I think I'd say if I had to answer right now, and of course things are likely to change, I'd default towards just keeping them and then gradually starting to think about passing on. What about you? You spoke very passionately about the ultimate property strategies. I've got a feeling that might be part of your plans.
It would be part, but what I think I would do, Rob, is I'd pick a mix between the strategies. So if I look at this example portfolio and just say, right, this is my portfolio now, How would I approach this scenario? Well, for me, I wouldn't want to own 10 properties in retirement. So I'd look at a rebalancing. We talked about the Monopoly strategy a few times on the podcast recently. I'd probably play a bit of Monopoly here and trade down some of those smaller houses and consolidate the portfolio by selling some and buying more expensive ones. Bit by bit, my aim would be to try and have properties to manage. Because 10 properties, 10 mortgage applications, all the rest of it just seems like hard work. And I'm going to assume in retirement, I don't want hard work. So I'm going to reduce the portfolio in the terms of unit numbers. Now, once I've done that, what I'd probably do is a mix. I would do what you've said, Rob. I would take the rental income from the property, but at opportune moments, use some debt. So when I come to retirement age, and I've got this portfolio as the example to access, in low interest environments, I would be looking to use as much debt as possible and taking that debt out over the longest time periods possible. So what do I mean by that? Let's just say when I come to retire, we're in a low interest rate environment again, similar to what we've had before, and I can borrow at 2.5%. Well, then if I could get a 10-year mortgage on those sort of rates, I would be looking to leverage quite a bit, actually. I'd be trying to take out as much as possible. But if interest rates were, say, 6% when I come to retire, I probably wouldn't do it. So I would judge it on the interest rate environment I find myself in when I get to retirement. That's the beautiful thing. You don't have to pick your strategy today. You can just have things in mind and go, okay, I would intend to do this, but if that isn't advantageous right now, I'll do this. And you do have that choice, Rob. And I think that's the beautiful thing about this episode. It should be putting a lot of people at ease, because I think a lot of people get stressed about the end game, and often before they've even started, to go, well, what will I do about this? Or what will I do about my interest-only mortgages? Well, as we've demonstrated today, you don't just have one option, you have many options.
And they're all really good options. And everything we've talked about is a bit artificial, right? Like, you're not realistically going to do any of these strictly. Like, no one's going to get to the age of 65 and then suddenly go, boom, sell everything overnight. Realistically, you're going to be more opportunistic. You're going to take advantage of market conditions. There are times when it's good to sell and times when it's not. You'll have things triggered by ends of tenancy, end of mortgages, by interest rate environment, like you said. So I think you can have a template in mind, but life is always messier than spreadsheets. So you're going to have circumstances changing on you. So you don't have to, wherever you are today, whether you're just getting started or you're a little bit in, I don't think you need to be picking one of these and committing to it. You can have a leaning towards what you're going to do, and it can be useful to have ideas in mind. But for me, Rob, the takeaway from this episode shouldn't be, right, I need to choose one of these. The takeaway should be, oh, great, I've got loads of options and they're all really good ones. The driver behind all of these, the reason that you've got all of these great options is because you've got this wonderful thing that we've talked about so many times before, where your debt stays static and your property value gradually increases. In other words, over time, even if you start with loan to value of 75%, over time, your property values go up, your equity grows, which brings your loan to value down, which is what puts you in this wonderful position. Even if you're refinancing as you go along to grow faster, which some people do, then as long as you put in some kind of coast phase at the end, so you might spend 10 years aggressively refinancing, growing as fast as you can, then another 10 years just coasting, letting property values go up, letting your debt stay where it is, you'll still end up in a position where you've got loads of equity and loads of options.
Loads of value in this week's episode, but we're not stopped with that value train, because it's time for Hub Extra, the part of the show where we bring you a bit more, a bit extra. And Rob, this week, you are bringing us a show. What have you been to see?
I've been to see Choir of Man in the West End, and it was so good. It was amazing. So it's a musical. I'd barely call it a musical because it's really light on plot. There's basically none. It's just great singing, great choreography. It's based around the concept of a pub. There is a working bar on stage. They give out free beer to the audience during the show. It's just really fun. Thoroughly recommend it.
I think you've just got another ticket sold with that free beer, Rob. I'm already on the website. Sounds great. I do love a musical. Highly recommend you support our wonderful industry in the West End. I've not heard of that show, if I'm being completely honest, so I look forward to checking it out and adding it to my list. Good recommendation. And I've got a good recommendation for you to pick up the Sunday Times on Sunday, where you'll find us answering more of your questions. Or join us on Tuesday for Ask Rob and Rob. And of course, put next Thursday in your calendar, ready, bright and early, because we will be with another property podcast. So until all those wonderful events occur, Take care. Have fun. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.